Today, we're going to build a Bond. Everyone is wondering who the next James Bond will be, assuming there is going to be one. Well, we want to take a look at what we liked about each of the James Bonds so far, and what combination of characteristics of these 6 previous Bonds should be rolled up into the next one. We are going to build the next James Bond. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
Our podcast, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, and our website, spymovienavigator.com, are the premier go-to resources for spy movie fans. Enjoy. All right, well, let's dive into the tuxedo-clad Bond characters and pull out what we call the Bond persona elements that we love and want in our Build-A-Bond. There is no answer ever as to who was the best James Bond. Often we find in our talks with fans that the Bond they grew up with is the Bond of choice, and that makes perfect sense. But there are some traditional characteristics of Bond that permeate the character, the essence of Bond that fans like.
Yeah, so let's start this by looking at the first big screen James Bond, Sean Connery. And it's easy to see many things we like in Sean Connery's portrayal of Bond. I mean, part of it is because he was the first on-screen Bond in an Eon Productions movie.
Yeah.
And he was very well received because he came off as dashing, tuxedo wearing, very suave, worldly, woman wooing. So Dan, what did Connery do well here?
Hey, just about everything. I mean, the man set the standard. Connery's portrayal of Bond in the early films, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and more, defined the character, and Terence Young, the director of the first 2, and then Thunderball, was a big part of developing his on-screen persona. Connery as Bond oozed charisma.
Oh yeah, he did.
He delivered to perfection the killer one-liners that were written for him, and he made the role his own. Real Bond fans have seen all the Bond movies, and many look at Connery as the real benchmark against which all other Bonds are measured. The intro to Bond was perfection here, right?
Bond. James Bond.
Is known around the world, and so is that scene.
And I think from the first movie, Dr. No, Sean Connery showed us this Bond who was ruthless. I mean, he was a killer to get his mission done. I mean, take that scene when he shoots the unarmed Dent in Miss Tarot's place. And then he shoots him a second time.
I love that.
Here we see an MI6 agent, 007, for the first time being the blunt instrument of the government that Fleming wrote about.
Yeah.
And we understand what that 00 designation means. It means he can kill.
Yeah,
right?
And he did.
But was this an acceptable thing for a government agent to do?
I think, watching this for the first time, I think it was acceptable to the audience because we knew Dent just tried to kill Bond, and that Dent worked for Dr. No and was part of the enemy that Bond needed to defeat. But the setup to this kill is what helped define James Bond to the world watching. After Dent unloads his 6 shots into the bed where he thought Bond was sleeping, Bond utters the epic line.
It's a Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
That told us a lot about the persona of James Bond.
Yeah.
He knows his business. He's calm and cool. He's confident. He's got strength in every way. He's independent, almost a loner type, really, here. And he is deadly and willing to kill as part of his mission. He has a license to kill, and he's not afraid to use it.
Oh, and you think about the ruthlessness here, because Dent's unarmed at this point.
Yeah, I know. It's fantastic, right? For fans just seeing James Bond on the screen for the first time, this was a powerful scene.
And I actually think the entire Dr. No movie showed us many elements of James Bond that we've always loved. You've got this ruthlessness, his toughness, his physicality, all here in Dr. No.
Yeah, his one-liners were amusing and gave us a smile, but were never over the top slapstick. And his worldliness, what he knew of the finer things in life and the world in general. Every man wanted to be James Bond, and every woman wanted to know somebody like James Bond.
Yeah, but it wasn't just that. There was also the fact that, I mean, he was a thinker. I mean, he could get into tough situations and figure out how to get out of them. And we saw that in every James Bond movie up until No Time to Die when he gave up.
Yeah, right. And he went after
Sean
the
Connery's Bond was a thinker.
Yeah. So all these elements we're pulling out here, we're going to assemble later, right? He went after the Bond girl at the end to save her, too. He was handsome. He was charming. And women loved him. From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, all added to this persona. The drinking, the gambling, the womanizing, and the desire for the better things in life. Even though he was a civil servant in MI6, he wanted those things. All part of what we loved as Bond.
Yeah, and I think that Connery was a great start to this new James Bond character. It was a little different. I mean, it was different than the book,
Oh, yeah.
but for the movie, for the screen, it was a really great way to set the stage here. And so when we build this next James Bond, what we're going to do past Daniel Craig's series, there's a lot to pull from Connery's initial James Bond portrayal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, we want to give a shout out too to some of our special listeners who gave us feedback on our last episode. So a big shout out to Jim Phelps and Andy James Barkley. Thank you very much, guys. Keep the feedback coming. We love it. George Lazenby, in his one outing as James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, he had mixed reviews on his effectiveness as James Bond. We personally love George as Bond and think that if he had done a few more Bond movies, he would be one of the much talked about Bonds in a positive light right now.
I totally agree with you on that. He was really good in this movie.
Yeah, few can deny he brought an element of emotion to the Bond character to a depth we had not seen before, and we liked it. Despite initial skepticism, he delivered a surprisingly heartfelt performance. The film itself is a gem, and Lazenby's tragic Bond left an indelible mark for all Bond fans. If only he'd stuck around longer.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, the other thing is he continues with a fairly straightforward delivery of some of these entertaining one-liners and quips, which were a continuation of what we liked in Connery's Bond. The quips were there, they weren't over the top. And I especially liked how he broke the fourth wall and acknowledged that he was a new actor playing James Bond and that he'd probably be a little different.
This never happened to the other fella.
Lazenby brought forward the toughness of Bond, his drinking and womanizing, and sophistication and worldly knowledge.
Royal Beluga, north of the Caspian.
You gotta love it.
Yeah,
All right.
and I love that one because he's just walking out of the room. He's saying that to nobody. It's great.
Yeah. He was good. Connery showed some emotion when Quarrel was killed in Dr. No and when Jill Masterson was killed by Oddjob in Goldfinger, but not to the depth we saw in On Her Majesty's Secret Service by George Lazenby. So add emotional depth to our list of things we like and accept about Bond.
To be fair, Dan, to Connery here, the two deaths you talked about there shouldn't have had the same emotional impact as Tracy's death.
Yes,
I mean, Tracy was his wife. So I'm glad there was more emotion here. Anything less, I don't think would have worked. And that said, I think Lazenby did a great job showing that emotion at the end of this movie.
Yeah, good point. All right.
Okay, so let's move on to Roger Moore. Now, Roger gets a lot of love and quite a bit of disdain. He was indeed a smooth operator. His Bond was like a fine champagne, effervescent, debonair, and campy. Yeah. His movies, Live and Let Die, The Spy Who Loved Me, etc., leaned into the humor and spectacle. Now, how much of that was Maybaum's writing versus Roger Moore's ability to play comedy, we don't really know. But the combination of the writing with Moore's acting worked for those fans who like seeing more humor in a Bond movie.
Yeah, and he's really one of the only ones who brought the funny facial expressions to the Bond character, really, like out of control stuff or funny stuff, like vaudeville almost. So,
well, the way he could raise his one eyebrow,
yeah, little different than the other guys. All right, Moore brought forward the sophistication of Bond that we saw with Connery and Lazenby, his willingness to kill. Some of the kills were cold, like in The Spy Who Loved Me when he knocks Sander off the roof of the building when he's looking for Feckish.
Where's Feckish?
Yeah. And he uses a woman to take a bullet like Connery did in Thunderball, and a cold kill in For Your Eyes Only, kicking Locke's car over the cliff. Wow, that was good.
You left this with Ferrara, I believe.
So that element was brought forward. His coolness, his calmness, his sense of his business, add that to his love of drink and the finer things, all are brought forward with Moore's portrayal.
And, he was also a pretty good womanizer. But we
Yeah.
didn't see much emotional depth here in Moore. And we saw Moore change the role of Bond a bit. He's in casual clothing, don't forget that safari suit.
Safari suit,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Smoking cigars instead of cigarettes. And the one-liners that were far more on the comedy side than on the clever, sophisticated, and charming one-liners we saw in the earlier Bond characterization. This is one of the biggest critiques of Moore as James Bond. But again, how much of this is Roger Moore? How much of it was the writing, and what effect did Moore have on the writing? So was it really a combination of the writing and Moore putting it all together, which made it more comedic?
Yeah, those are all great questions. The way I look at it is as if Connery was the classic martini, Roger Moore was more like the exotic cocktail with a paper umbrella. Just kind of like, okay,
That's good. That's good.
a little added touch there with the umbrella. Moore brought campy, which was more or less accepted, the Bond role. So this brings us to Timothy Dalton.
Little different character here.
Often overlooked, but Dalton, we think, was very good. Dalton's James Bond was a darker, more serious take on the character. His two movies, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, dialed down the humor and the one-liners and amped up the espionage and toughness of Bond. Think of him as the deadly assassin that Bond was in the Connery era on steroids, but without much emotional depth or humor.
Yeah, now see, I thought he was an outstanding darker Bond.
Yeah.
And he was really the first real dark Bond. He brought forward many of the tough characteristics of Bond from the previous actors' versions. We had the drinking, the gambling, tuxedo-clad sophistication, and very devout loyalty to his friends. But a lot of the criticism of Dalton was that he was humorless. I mean, there were no real one-liners to give the viewers a break once in a while.
Yeah.
And part of that was intentional because they were trying to say we took it too far with Roger. But that kind of repartee didn't exist here. So again, how much of that was the writing and how much of that was due to Dalton saying, I want to play James Bond as Ian Fleming wrote him. I mean, I think it's a bit of both, but some fans didn't like that. Yet they got dark again when they went to Daniel Craig, and fans were more accepting by then.
Yeah, they closed the shutters on that one. All right. So we love the tougher Bond to a degree, but not his lack of emotion or humor. So we can add darkness to what we like, but Dalton was considered over the top dark. But he played Bond much like you said, Fleming wrote Bond, and that's how he liked it. If he was a bridge at all between the characters played by the previous Bonds, he's probably bridging the darker elements of each of the previous Bonds and ramping it up several notches. So let's extract his toughness as a plus here.
Oh, and his darkness. I really like that.
And his darkness. Yeah. All right.
All right. So then that then gets us to Pierce Brosnan, who was the suave 1990s Bond. He was updated because there was a 6-year gap between Bonds.
Yeah.
Still, he was sophisticated, charming, and some people say the coolest Bond. He still had the drinking, the womanizing, and the gambling. All the things we liked about the earlier portrayals are still here.
Yeah.
Now, his run included GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and that terrible movie, Die Another Day. Yet Brosnan balanced, sorry, I hate that movie, but Brosnan balanced his charm with plenty of action.
Yeah. Yeah, the gadgets got wilder, the stunts got crazier, invisible cars, all that stuff. Brosnan delivered the Bond character more or less with a wink and a raised eyebrow. Kind of like, okay, all right.
I am what I am. And I agree with you. I mean, yet his reign suffered from the storylines and the writing.
Yeah,
GoldenEye, Purvis and Wade weren't there by then, was perhaps his best overall movie.
Yeah.
Maybe because Purvis and Wade weren't there.
Oh, no, another Purvis and Wade dig. Oh, no. All right, but Brosnan as Bond was cool. And actually, as the next Bond, I think he's the coolest ex-Bond. He and Sean Connery were the coolest ex-Bonds. They were terrific. And he brought a new level of look and sophistication to the role. He probably was a bridge between the Moore era and perhaps the Dalton era. He was still vicious. His kill of Elektra, for example, in The World Is Not Enough. Oh, man. That's dramatic. It's a great kill.
Oh, it
It
is.
shows how vicious he is.
And ruthless, right? And I actually
Ruthless.
put that kill on
Point
the
blank.
same par as I do the lock kill. It was just
Yeah, oh, yeah.
ruthless, just boom, you're dead.
Yeah. Unarmed again. Boom.
Yep.
All right. What was new with Brosnan was the attempt to be that bridge, and people seem to like it. Again, with better screenplays and stories, I think the opinion of Brosnan as Bond would even be higher. But he is well liked as Bond. A lot of fans love Brosnan.
He just got really crappy scripts.
Yeah. All right. Come on, Tom. Let's get on to one of your favorites, Daniel Craig.
You know, he played a gritty, brooding Bond for the modern age.
Yeah.
He brought vulnerability, physicality, and emotional depth to the role, bringing some of the darkness that we saw in Brosnan. But by then, political correctness had started taking over, so things changed a bit.
Yeah. His best movie, most think, is Casino Royale, which rebooted the series, but most people think his best outing as James Bond, as his performance as Bond, was in Skyfall.
I kind of disagree a bit here. I think his performance was much better in Casino Royale. And in fact, his best performance was Casino
Yeah, you
Royale.
look at the pre-title sequence in Casino.
Yeah.
You can't get any better than that.
Absolutely.
I
think a big part of the reason for it is the movie was so good because it was based on Fleming's book. Craig brought the darkness of the Fleming's Bond character into it.
Yeah.
So I think it worked very well there. But I think as the Bond series continued and we had Purvis and Wade putting their vote on how things go, and quite honestly, again, the political correctness really started to hit here, and they got rid of some of the characteristics we like in Bond that hurt Craig in playing this role.
Right. Yeah, and Daniel Craig's Bond bleeds. He bruises. He wrestles with inner demons. But I think really, you look back, all the Bonds kind of wrestled, I think, with their inner demons in one way or another. You kind of feel that way. Craig, though, still maintained the charm and the looks of Bond. He looked great in the tux, was tougher than nails, still gambled, womanized to a degree, less as the movies went on, as he said, showed lots of emotion. He brought the concept of vulnerability and gritty realism to Bond, that he was not some superhero, but a human struggling with human stuff, including getting injured and maybe killed. In general, people identified with this vulnerable version of Bond and accepted this element as it was well portrayed by Craig.
Well, I think he ruined the character as he progressed through the movies. I didn't recognize this guy, James Bond, in that last movie. To me, that wasn't Bond.
All right.
But
we're bringing out the positives here that we're going to assemble. So there you go. Not the negatives. All right. Through all of these iterations, Bond also remains a bit of a mystery, in his past at least. We don't know a lot of it. We know pieces of it. So which Bond should we build? When we look back on all of the Bonds, as we just did, and highlight the elements that they brought to the character and the persona of Bond, and what people generally identified with, you really get a mix of the characters.
Yeah, no one captured all of these elements that people now identify with.
Right. So let's lay out the pieces that we'll build the next Bond with.
Yeah. So number one, he's got to know his business.
Yeah.
Number two, he's got to be confident and skilled.
Yep.
3, he has to have strength in every way and everything he does. 4, he's independent. And 5, he's somewhat of a mystery. We know bits and pieces of his past, but not all of it.
Yeah. And you know what? These are the elements we're pulling out of all the stuff we just talked about, right? All the positives, all the key elements of the Bonds that have already existed. All right. So number 6, he is deadly. He epitomizes the concept of a 00. Number 7, he has toughness, and sometimes toughness to the extreme mixed with his physicality. Number 8, yet in spite of that physicality, he was able to deliver amusing one-liners. So we like that. Number 9, he also has worldliness. He has knowledge of the finer things in life. He has knowledge of the world. He's been all over the world. He knows places in the world. He knows restaurants in Morocco. He knows what to do.
And we have to then not forget about some of the things they've been pulling back on here. Number 10, the drinking. Number 11, the gambling. Number 12, the womanizing. To me, these are key, even if Eon Productions have been trying to minimize these. They're important, and they can't have James Bond stripped of these three characteristics in my mind.
Yeah. Number 13, emotional depth. Number 15, a bit campy. Number 16, coolness and calmness. And number 17, vulnerability and gritty realism. Those are the elements that should be in the next Bond that we just built.
I
Bond's
totally agree
allure.
with you on that, Dan.
Bond's allure lies in this potent mix of traits, bringing us escapism, adventure, and danger.
So we can see that all of the actors who played James Bond left their mark on the role. So of the ones we've talked about so far, who's come closest to incorporating all of these elements? Dan, what do you think?
Probably you look back, probably Connery. He comes the closest, but a new Bond can incorporate all of these elements into a Bond that most people would identify with and accept. Don't go one way or the other. That's what we're telling you on. Right? Combine what has worked best in 60 plus years into the James Bond of the franchise. So listen to Dan and Tom, build the guy we just built, and you've got success for another 60 years. This is the opportunity Eon Productions has in front of them right now. And who can deliver this combination of elements we love?
Oh yeah, now don't forget the new actor has to be able to play a dead guy.
Yeah, that too. All right, now there are probably plenty of actors who can do this as long as they have physical abilities.
Yeah, so some of these actors that I can think of here that are the right age, and the age is going to be important here because since they delayed No Time to Die and didn't get it out before the pandemic, yes, they didn't know the pandemic was looming, but it was supposed to be out in November before the pandemic. Some of these actors who've been on these lists people talk about have, I think, aged too far. So we'll talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, and again, it depends on where they go too with this.
Yeah.
Going in the past, they're going in the future, they say and ignore us. Go ahead.
So one of the names you hear all the time is Aaron Taylor Johnson. I mean, he's only 34. He's shown he has a lot of the characteristics we talked about through other work that he's done. He's got that tough guy stuff he showed in The Avengers, Age of Ultron, and in Kick-Ass. His work in Tenet, Bullet Train, The Kingsman, and others showcased more than just his tough guy abilities. He brought some of these other characteristics in. And I think that's one of the reasons he's one of the, they always say is one of the favorites.
Okay. Yeah, Henry Cavill, of course, his name has popped up a million times. And I don't know. He showed us that he can play a spy in movies like The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. My biggest concern with him is his age.
Yeah.
With it taking so long between Bond movies now, I'm not sure that they could bring in a 41-year-old actor to reboot the series in any way, really. What are they going to do? Get 2, maybe 3 movies at the most? I think they're going to have to go younger.
Yeah,
but
and I think
I like him.
Yeah, I like him, but I think this age thing is a problem for them. And like I said, I'm going to rattle off some of these names of some guys that have been bandied about, but they've aged out of the role, I believe. And so this is like a Tom Hardy, who's already 46, Idris Elba, who's 52, Charlie Hunnam, who's 44, Sam Heughan, who I like a lot, but he's 44 as well. And I think these are all very good actors who could take on the role of Bond well, bring the personas we talked about, but I think it's too late for them to take over a reboot. If they were doing a movie every year or two, like they did when the series started, maybe I'd have a different mindset here. But given recent history, I'm sorry, but I don't think this group of actors will work because of their age. And I'm a lot older than them, so this is an ageism.
All right, so they're not in our Build a Bond box. Okay.
All right, so 2 other actors that I think, besides Aaron Taylor Johnson, which I find would be interesting, and one I really, really like here is John Boyega. He's 32, and he has some good chops for this genre. He played Finn in the Star Wars series.
Yeah, he was good.
King Gezo in The Woman King, and Fontaine in They Clone Tyrone. So he's given us different characterizations of characters, not just all action. And I think he's one that has shown that he can take on a role like Bond, but it would be a big change for the character if they brought Boyega in for the role. But I really like him.
Yeah.
Now,
and let's talk about Regé-Jean Page, because everybody's talked about him. And what about that?
Yeah, so now he's 36, so I like the age profile here.
He's okay
so he
there,
might be able to get 2 or more movies in than Cavill. My wife is a big fan of Page's. mainly from Bridgerton. In fact, when she watched Bridgerton, she said, "There's your next James Bond." But I'm not sure that he's shown enough action talent needed to take on the role of Bond. Most of his roles haven't been heavy action. Yes, he did do Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, to showcase some of this to us. But his role in the only really good spy movie he did, which was The Gray Man, he didn't showcase his action talents much there. So I think he's a long shot, even though my wife disagrees.
All right. There are a lot of other good actors too, and we could add to this list a million of us, except for Tom and me. We're not on that list. My guess is that it'll be someone new that isn't on this list, but who knows? Again, we're not going to speculate anymore, but we're doing this as part of our Build a Bond, that some of these are not in the Build a Bond box. So even with actors like these, the key is writing, I think. Given the baseline skills of a great actor and the physical abilities to pull off some of these elements and to be emotional, writing, I think, will make the difference. Look at what George Lazenby pulled off in On Her Majesty's Secret Service with great writing and great adaptation of the story from Fleming. It can be done.
So, Dan, what you're saying here is we've got to build that new Bond character. We got to get rid of Purvis and Wade so we can get some good writing behind that character.
We need writing.
And go forward.
We gave you our 16 elements of what needs to be in the next Bond. It's just easy now, right around that. This is the way to go. So grab your Walter PPK, adjust your cufflinks, straighten your tie, have a martini, and enjoy the ride. It's a Bond world after all. Let's get going. That's a wrap. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Subscribe to our show and our YouTube channel as well. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you spending time with us. Thanks.